Welcome back to Good Reads. I'm your host, Jim Hall. Today we've got a very special program. Today we have author and photographer Jeff Morrison on. Jeff has just finished two extraordinary books, Guardians of Detroit and Guardians of Michigan. Two wonderful books that feature the lost and secret art available all around us in Detroit and all over Michigan. Hidden gems and things that you just may have overlooked 100 times walking past. They're such special books because I feel like Jeff has let us in on a secret that everybody doesn't know about. So Jeff, thanks so much for being here today. And would you talk a little bit about, especially after your presentation at the library a couple of weeks ago, you talked and you started your program with a very simple question. How many people have seen this tiger? And of course, it's outside Comerica Park. Everybody said yes. Then you followed with a second picture, and nobody knew what that was. Can you talk a little bit about that?
First of all, Jim, thanks for having me on the show. And yeah, I like the way you described it as secret art, because that's kind of the way I look at it. It's secret and overlooked, too. And the whole idea behind the Guardians of Michigan and Guardians of Detroit project is to find all these great pieces of architectural sculpture that just get ignored. You know, they're everyday art, and people typically don't go there to see them. It's there for them to see as they walk by. And a lot of times, you know, people get tired or just aren't paying attention to their surroundings that much, especially if they take that route on a normal basis. So yeah, that's the idea behind Guardians of Detroit and Guardians of Michigan, is to find these pieces of art, bring them up close and personal for people to enjoy and appreciate.
Jeff, could you talk a little bit about the significance of these grotesques and these gargoyles in architecture and almost all the architecture that occurred by the significant architects in the 1800s and early 1900s? Why was this so significant?
Yeah, Detroit from 1850 on into 1930 and so on was really growing economically and architecturally, and there was a huge boom in building in Detroit and the Detroit area at a time when architectural sculpture was key, was part and parcel of every building, whether it's a religious building or a public building or a business building. And so Detroit became this huge depository of architectural sculpture. And that's one of the things that made doing Guardians of Detroit almost an obligation, because there was just so much sculpture in Detroit. And one of the things that I was surprised when I was first deciding to do something like this, I went online and looked for books about architectural sculpture in Detroit, and there weren't any, and that really surprised me. So I tried to fill that niche, that gap.
There were so many amazing sculptures and pieces of art that you featured in your presentation. Can you talk about two or three that really strike you as fascinating, in particular in Detroit, where people could go down this weekend or the next time they're down there and maybe look for these particular pieces? But in particular, things that you were really like, wow, this is really something. I've really stumbled onto something amazing here. And share some stories.
Well, I think St. John's Episcopal Church, it's on Woodward Avenue across the street from Hockeytown Cafe and, you know, near Comerica Park. I think that's a great place to start, because if anybody's going downtown to watch a ball game, go down a little early and take some time to walk around that building. That face that you were talking about is on the south side of that building, but there's some great sculpture on the front of the building faces the west, and there's some great sculpture on that and also on the north side of the building. But the building that really, for me, epitomized what architectural sculpture is all about is Trinity Episcopal Church. It's on Trumbull and MLK. And it's a beautiful old church. It was heavily researched, and the people that built it, they wanted to build something that looked like a 13th century European English church. And they did a lot of research and based their work on historical drawings. And as a matter of fact, this image here is from that church. And there's over 100, it's over 150 individual pieces of sculpture on the outside of that church. And it's all different kinds of faces and forms and demons and gargoyles, and even one of the men that worked on the building is immortalized as a gargoyle on the church. And it's just a great building. And then an interesting thing about that building is there's a series of gargoyles at the clear story, the upper levels of the church. And in that building, everywhere there's a gargoyle on the outside of that level, there's an angel on the inside. So that's kind of a neat point.
Now, can you talk a little bit for the people at home about why those were there in the first place, the significance? In some, when you talked about your presentation, that some are actually features and water comes out, it's used as drainage. But why is it there's sometimes a physical use, but why are they there? Why did the sculptors and why did the architects want these art representations on their buildings?
There's a couple of reasons. There's a difference between gargoyles and grotesques. A gargoyle has a practical function by channeling water away. They're like a rain spout, basically. Channel water away from the wall of the building to keep it from damaging the wall of the building. And they can be carved in a lot of more fanciful shapes. They can be fairly big and large, or they could be just a small face with a mouth that water comes out of. And a grotesque is basically everything else. That doesn't have a practical function, but it's there as an ornamentation of some kind. The reason for putting gargoyles and grotesques on a church, there's two reasons. One is the gargoyles are meant to scare away evil spirits and evil demons. If you look at a church that has a lot of gargoyles and sculpture on it, usually looks like the gargoyle is leaving or moving away from the church. And that's to show any evil spirits or demons that might come around that there's no place for them in this church. And then you also have a lot of churches have portraits of saints and apostles, perhaps their patron saint. If their patron saint is Saint Hyacinth, then there's oftentimes a sculpture of Saint Hyacinth on the outside of the church. Catholic churches often have Saint Peter and Saint Paul on the outside. Some churches have all the apostles on the outside. So it's on churches it's usually religiously related, although some have more secular images too. And then on business buildings, typically the sculpture is there to symbolize the strength and stability of the business and to symbolize what goes on at that business.
Something that was really interesting to me about the presentation and in the book is the Italian architect that was so predominant here in Detroit. And then you start looking at all the works, and if you go through your book, you really can make a few weekends out of just touring different things in Detroit and then having lunch and seeing stuff. But I can see the similarities, and you said you'll start to realize that this is this gentleman's work and so on and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about him and how prominent he is in the Detroit architecture that we're going to see, that we see in your book?
Yeah, a huge amount of the architectural sculpture in Detroit and even in parts of Michigan outside of Detroit was carved and modeled and created by a man named Corrado Parducci, who was born in Italy in 1900, came here to the U.S., to New York with his father in 1905, grew up in New York, was fortunate to benefit from some specialized art training in New York City, and then came to Detroit around the winter of 1924, 1925. He was Albert Kahn's favorite sculptor, and he came to oversee some of the work that was being done that he had modeled the sculpture for on a couple of bank buildings in Detroit. And other architectural firms in Detroit recognized his ability and his talent, and he got overwhelmed with offers of work in Detroit, and he decided to stay in Detroit. And he was a very hard worker. worked 6-7 days a week, often slept at his studio, maybe saw his family on the weekends or on Sunday, and then got right back to it. And it's not an exaggeration to say that about 90% of the buildings, maybe more, that went up between 1924 and 1925 and on into the 30s and even the 40s, if they had architectural sculpture on them or in them, odds are Corrado Parducci did all or at least part of it.
Right. I thought that was really interesting. You talked in your presentation. And then in the book, I can't stress enough in the Guardians of Detroit, amazing photo after amazing photo after amazing photo. And you shared a story that I'd like you to talk about, or maybe you'll think of a different one, that sometimes to get these wonderful shots that aren't, some of these sculptures are hundreds of feet in the air or hidden in certain places and difficult. You talked in particular about one where you went in the dead of winter and it wasn't your, can you share that story a little bit about how it's not just as simple as, oh, here's a nice thing, click. This is just a work of love and the photography is just brilliant. And I'd like you to share that story.
I think you're talking about Fort Street Presbyterian Church.
Yes.
On Fort Street, just a little west of downtown Detroit. And it's a beautiful old Victorian church. And I was there taking pictures of the building of the west side of the building. And there's some very nice architectural sculpture on the west side of the building. And typically if there's sculpture on one side, there's sculpture on the other side. And you can't see the sculpture on the other side from outside because after the church was built, 20 or 30 years after the church was built, they put up what's called a church house. And that's a building with classrooms and auditoriums and things of that nature. And you can't see the east side of the building because it's blocked by that church house. So I called the church and asked if there was sculpture on the east side of the building, and they said, yes, there is. And I asked if I could go into the church house so I could see it, and they said, yes, I could. So I went, and you go up to the second floor, and you look out the window, and you can see some of these very, very nice faces on the east side of the church, but you can't see all of it unless you climb out the window onto the roof of the lower part of the building. And then you can see more, but you still can't see all unless you go to the south end of the building and climb a steel ladder, vertical steel ladder that's bolted into the wall, and then you can see the last face or two and get pictures of them. And as I mentioned, a smart person would have done that on a nice warm summer day, and I ended up doing it in February when it was kind of rainy and icy, but it was well worth it because, as I noted in the presentation, I got pictures of faces that people haven't seen from the street for over 100 years. Right. And again, that goes to what the mission of Guardians of Detroit and Guardians of Michigan, what that's all about, which is finding these pieces of architectural sculpture that are hidden or easily overlooked and bringing them out into the open for people to appreciate and enjoy.
Right, like I said in the open, it really, when I went through the book and seeing it, it feels like you've let us in on certain secrets that other people don't know about, and I think it's so wonderful. And thank you for sharing that stuff with us. Now, I can't recommend it highly enough. Go purchase Guardians of Detroit, get online, support this man. But then you also took it one step further in all your investigations, that there's wonderful sculptures all over Michigan, and you've put together Guardians of Michigan, which highlights amazing sculptures all over the state. Can you highlight a few of your favorites from the Guardians of Michigan?
Sure. From Michigan, I think the auditorium in Grand Rapids has some great sculpture on it, and they, if you go to that auditorium, the entrance has some really nice sculpture on it. But they remodeled, they tore down a big part of that auditorium, but they saved it, and they kept that sculpture and put it on the inside of the auditorium, so you can go inside and still see that sculpture. And then there's also, I think it's St. Paul's Cathedral up in Marquette.
Mm-hmm. I went to school up there, so I was really thrilled that you featured that.
You know, on Baraga Street in Marquette. That's a beautiful old church that was built and then it burnt down, and all that was left was the stone walls, and then they rebuilt it bigger and better. and there's some very nice sculpture on that. And then a little closer, Christchurch Cranbrook has these great sculptures on the outside of the building, where on one side is all religious related figures on the north side of the church, and on the south side is all more secular figures, which is unusual for a church to feature secular features like Wilbur Wright or Leonardo da Vinci or Galileo. And they were chosen, the ones on the north side were chosen because of their influence in religious issues, and the ones on the south side were chosen because they advanced scientific thought and knowledge in the face of opposition from secular and religious authorities.
One of the things I told you, I went to school in Marquette. You did a section about the UP, and sometimes you can't always, you do a lot of investigation and you find out who these architects are, who the artists are. But in one particular case where there were the stuff in the UP with the art and all that, and it was very similar through different schools in the UP, you weren't able to identify that art, correct?
No, that's correct. A lot of times these men and occasionally women that did architectural sculpture on these buildings, they wouldn't be identified because they were, just contract workers. They weren't necessarily considered artists. Now that changed as time progressed, but there's a building in the far western end of the Upper Peninsula in a city called Wakefield, which is almost as far as you can go in the UP without getting into Wisconsin. And there's a great sculpture on the Wakefield High School gymnasium shows the activities that go on in a typical gymnasium, people engaged in sporting activities. And it's in a unique kind of geometrical, multi-layered style of sculpture. And I saw that on several school buildings across the UP, and I could not find out if it was just because they were all designed by the same architects, but were the sculptures just sketched in by the architects and carved by stone cutters?
Right. Was they copying?
Or did they use the same sculptor on all these buildings?
In the presentation in the book, it's obvious that they seem to be the same artist, and I thought that was really neat that you discovered that. Now, can you talk about these books are such labors of love. They're absolutely amazing, and I can't stress enough, I'm hoping people go out and purchase these, make a great Christmas gift, birthday presents. But what got you, what was the origin of you deciding to do these books? What brought that on?
Well, in 2015, I found myself unemployed after working 30 years as a graphic artist. And I was looking for work, and I couldn't really find a job that I was excited about, that I was interested in doing. And I've been an amateur photographer for most of my life. I got my first camera when I was about 10, 12 years old for Christmas, and my dad was an amateur photographer as well. And so I have a lot of pictures, and I had taken some pictures of buildings. I've done some nature photography, things like that. Taken some pictures of some buildings, and I was organizing photographs in some downtime, and I came across pictures that I had taken of some buildings in Detroit. And I thought, if I don't find a job, I could put together maybe a 50 to 100 page booklet of architectural sculpture in Detroit, and maybe some gift shops or Detroit shops or things of that nature, maybe the museum shops might be interested in selling that book in their shops. And as I worked in Detroit, I kept finding more and more and more sculpture. And my original 50 to 100 page book grew to about 335 pages, I think the total was. And so I took that to Wayne State University Press as I was working on it, and they agreed that they would want to publish the book. And so I finished up the book and turned it over to them, and in 2017 it was released. And then I went on, as I was working on the Guardians of Detroit book, I realized there's a lot of architectural sculpture outside of Detroit. If you buy a car, say you buy a Jeep, compass. All of a sudden you start seeing all the other Jeep compasses on the road that you never noticed before. Well, if as I did this, when I would go out of town or travel around Michigan, I started noticing more and more sculpture, and I realized, well, the rest of Michigan outside of Detroit has a lot of sculpture as well. And I ended up with 460 pages, over 1,200 photographs, with the Guardians of Michigan book, and I took that to University of Michigan Press, and fortunate enough to have them publish it as well.
Now, in your presentation, you've been touring the state to promote both books, super well received, and now it's gotten to a point where it's not going to stop here. Can you talk a little bit about, you have some future plans maybe?
Well, I'm working on a book called Guardians of Ohio, which is disappointing to a lot of Michigan people. You say Ohio and they go, oh. But it's a really interesting book. It's a lot of fun to work on. Some great architectural sculpture in Ohio. Some that our viewers might want to go to, could easily visit Toledo. A lot of architectural sculpture in Toledo. Cleveland, Cincinnati, Columbus, that city. A lot of great places in Ohio, a lot of great architectural sculpture, and in a lot of the smaller towns too.
Okay, as we're getting close to wrapping up, I'm going to give you an opportunity to send people to the website and how they can get the book. But what are the couple of things you'd want people to know about both books, why they're important, why people should be picking them up?
One of my goals in doing these projects, besides having something to work on that I really wanted to work on, that excited me and interested me, was to help build support for historic preservation and adaptive reuse. It really struck me doing the Guardians of Michigan book as I drove to a lot of these smaller towns that are county seats that have a county courthouse that was built around the turn of the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. The pride that the people of these towns take in these buildings. And at a time when so many old buildings get torn down, you know, we need a new building, we need a new courthouse. They found ways to preserve so many of these old courthouses. And I just think that's very, very important to raise awareness of the cultural wealth and the architectural wealth that we have in Detroit and that we have in Michigan, and that it's really worth preserving.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, I can't say enough about how much I enjoyed. I purchased the Guardians of Detroit that day. Looked forward to, I'm purchasing Guardians of Michigan. Just an absolute, how I opened. You let me in on a secret world that I didn't even know about. I was aware of maybe 2 or 3 of the different sculptures, and now when I'm in Detroit, I'm going to be looking around and looking for even more things that, like, look up, look around. There's all these things right in front of you, and you just, you know, thank you for what you've done, because you really have put out a couple of books. Your photography is amazing, and there's something really to be proud of, because you've let us in on a secret that we may not have known about otherwise. But please tell people how they can learn more about you, and how they can go to your website, and how they can purchase the book.
There's 2 websites relating to the books. There's guardiansofdetroit.com and guardiansofmichigan.com. Both of those have ways that you can buy autographed copies of the Guardians of Detroit book, the Guardians of Michigan book, and there's also a Guardians of Detroit adult coloring book that people may be interested in, that you can purchase at those websites. You can contact me through the website. If you have any questions about the book, please feel free to email me through the website. You can, or at guardiansofdetroit.com or Guardians of Michigan, or excuse me, Guardians of Detroit at gmail.com or Guardians of Michigan at gmail.com. To contact me. There's also on those websites, I do a lot of presentations at libraries, historical clubs, and all different kinds of groups like that. My schedule is on both websites. You can also, if you want to purchase the books, you can get them at the Wayne State University website for Guardians of Detroit, the University of Michigan Publications website for Guardians of Michigan, and also Amazon, Barnes & Noble. A lot of these different kinds of companies the book is available at all of these places.
Excellent.
And also, if I could, if you have one of the books or you have a building that you think might be of interest to me, or that you've seen the books and you think, oh, he overlooked this building, how could he leave this building out? Please let me know. I would love to find out. I'm also working on a supplement to the Guardians of Detroit book that includes buildings that I overlooked or I felt didn't get enough attention in the Guardians of Detroit.
Well, excellent. I'm just so thrilled I got a chance to cover your event, meet you, and have you here today. I really am amazed by these books, the hours of work and devotion put into them. You've done a fantastic job. Thank you again for coming on the show today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jim, and thank you for having me on the show. It was literally my pleasure working on the books and doing the presentations that you mentioned and coming here today. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you again. Well, that's going to wrap it up, folks. I can't stress enough. Please go out. Jeff just told you the different ways. If you prefer bookstores, go to your bookstores, do it that way. But it's going to be very easy. I'm telling you, these will make fantastic holiday gifts, birthday gifts, something to put on the coffee table and look through. They're really amazing. So please take the time and think about doing that. I appreciate you watching the show, and we'll see you next time.